Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Craig Burrell, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is leading aircraft woman Sierra Nolan. This evening we're honoured to acknowledge Dr. Goran Grlić Radman, Minister of Foreign and European Affairs of the Republic of Croatia, and Mrs. Marijana Grlić Radman, accompanied by Her Excellency Mrs. Betty Pavelic, Ambassador of Croatia to Australia, New Zealand and Fiji, and the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps. We warmly welcome Mr. John Glenn, Managing Director of Kia Consulting, and the accompanying delegation. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. The live stream of this ceremony is made possible by the Retired and Services League of Australia and the RSL and Services Clubs Association. We welcome members who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial and students on behalf of Nerridon Senior High School from Nerridon, Western Australia. If you're able, please stand and join in singing the National Anthem.
Australians, oh let us rejoice, for we are one and free. With golden soil and wealth for toil, our home is got by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty, rich and rare. In history's page, let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains, then let us sing, advance Australia fair.
Please be seated if you could do so. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit in the hearts of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 103,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Captain Frederick Eckersley Boddington. Frederick Boddington was born on the 5th of February in 1888 in Maryborough, Queensland. Known as Fred, he was one of 8 children and the eldest son born to postmaster Frederick Boddington and his wife Emily. Young Fred grew up around Mackay, where he attended the local state school. He later attended Brisbane Grammar School before going on to study architecture and civil engineering. He opened his own firm as a young adult and in 1914 travelled to England to continue studying. When he arrived at Colombo in today's Sri Lanka, he heard that war had broken out. Boddington caught the first ship back to Australia, disembarking in Perth, where he enlisted into the Australian Imperial Force on the 17th of August 1914. Allotted to the 11th Battalion as a signaller, he began a short period of training in Australia. Less than a month after enlisting, he embarked for active service, sailing from Fremantle on board the troop ship Ask Any Us. After several weeks at sea, Private Boddington arrived in Egypt, where he continued training into the new year. Boddington's unit was the first ashore on the 25th of April 1915, landing on the Gallipoli beaches in the early hours of the morning. The 11th Battalion was drawn into the AIF's first raid of the war, 10 days later, when it attacked enemy position Agapa Tepe. The men then defended the front line of the Anzac beachhead until August, when they attacked the enemy in preparation of the Battle of Lone Pine. During the attack, Boddington was wounded while carrying messages from the commanding officer to headquarters. Suffering wounds to his face, he was evacuated to Egypt for treatment and did not rejoin his unit until after the August offensive. Following his return to the peninsula in September, Boddington was commissioned as second lieutenant. He carried out predominantly defensive roles with his unit before returning to Egypt suffering from concussion in November. While he was recovering, the Gallipoli campaign was abandoned, and by December 1915, troops were being evacuated from the peninsula. Boddington rejoined his unit in February 1916, having recently been promoted to lieutenant. As fresh troops arrived in Egypt, the AIF began a period of restructuring and expansion. In March 1916, Boddington was transferred to the 4th Pioneers and was promoted to captain. He embarked for the Western Front in June 1916, arriving in the French city of Marseille after a week-long voyage. He and his comrades were then sent north to the Franco-Belgian border, where they commenced a period of training and construction work. By July of 1916, the Battle of Somme had wreaked havoc on Allied units, which were suffering mass casualties. Boddington was transferred to the infantry at the end of the month, joining the 46th Battalion. Over the weeks that followed, he and his men provided carrying parties for other divisions involved in attacks at Posy Air and Mackay Farm, before being drawn into the fighting to defend the ground that had been captured. Boddington's unit spent the rest of the year alternating between duties in the trenches and resting behind the lines, enduring further suffering as a bitterly cold winter began to set in. Early 1917 was marked by the German forces' strategic withdrawal to the Hindenburg Line. Allied units eagerly followed the German retreat, believing the war was perhaps finally drawing to a close. It was not long, however, until their withdrawal halted at the enemy's new front line near the French village of Bullecourt. The Allies planned to mount an attack here to break through German lines and capture the village. Boddington's 46th Battalion attacked on the morning of the 11th of April, 1917, under cover from tanks rather than artillery. As the men jumped over the parapet, the tanks quickly proved to be worse than useless, and the attacking infantry were left exposed to murderous enemy fire. Soon forced to retreat, Allied units suffered more than 3 casualties in one day. Among the dead was Captain Fred Boddington. One of his men, Sergeant Bowman, recalled the last time he saw Boddington. He was about 20 yards away from me when a bomb fell where he was. I saw him lying there, and he was badly shattered and disfigured. He must have been killed instantly. It was in a trench at Bullecourt about 5:30 in the morning. A number of men were there when he was killed. One reported, "He had finished their charge and we were trying to hang on to the German trench and the Germans were bombing us to get us out. We were driven out and we had to leave him lying there. I don't know if he was ever buried. He was a very popular captain and looked after his men well." Frederick Boddington was 29 years old. Boddington's final resting place was never found. Today he's commemorated at the Australian National Memorial at Villers-Bretonneux, alongside more than 10,000 Australian servicemen who have no known graves. His family paid tribute to him in a simple notice in the Rockhampton Morning Bulletin, "Rest nobly earned." His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right among almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His photograph is displayed today by the Pool of Reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Captain Frederick Eckersley Boddington, who gave his life for us, for our freedom, and in hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We'll remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozieres or in the low scrub of Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of the Director, staff and volunteers, we thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support during the Memorial's development project. We wish you all a very pleasant evening.